going? Today I'm doing a lesson, and my lesson is going to be on senses. Okay, so senses. So what does that mean? It means we're going to be looking at your eye and your ear. We're looking at sensations, right? Like, so your eye sees things, your ear hears things. Like, you can hear my kids. Hey, I told you guys to be quiet. Anyway, so the thing is, senses or sensations begin with the receptor that detects the stimulus. And then it goes to a part of your brain which interprets the stimulus. That's how your senses work. And so we talked about different kinds of receptors, like the thermoreceptor senses heat, and the baroreceptor senses pressure. And we can talk about other types of receptors, like an osmoreceptor detects changes in water concentration, and so basically you have all of these in your body that detect changes, right? You also have chemoreceptors, and chemoreceptors detect chemicals. Like chemicals, I mean like sugar or glucose is a chemical. Like NaCl or salt is a chemical, because these guys are made up of the same chemicals found on your periodic table, chemistry, like carbon and hydrogen and oxygen. So these guys are chemoreceptors. They detect like scents and tastes. And so, I mean, that's basically all you need to know for sensations. You have to be able to look at the eye. The eye contains photoreceptors. So a photoreceptor detects light. So your eyes are actually really special because they are designed to detect light, and they detect a specific wavelength of light. So if there's like sunlight, so here's sunlight coming in, right? Sunlight actually enters your eye through here, and you actually bend the light. And you want to bend the light to a certain point, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But first we want to look at the eye. So what I'm drawing right now is like if you saw a person, like, this is their eyeball. And their eyeball connects all the way to the back of their brain. So you just imagine this is your brain. This is your eyeball. And your eyeball is connected through an optic nerve to the occipital, or the visual part of your brain. Okay, so that part of your brain is the occipital lobe. And so like your eyeballs, I mean, probably you've seen videos of people popping their eyeballs out, right? Your eyeballs are actually this, you only see a part of them when you look into somebody's eyes. You don't see the entire eyeball. And if your entire eyeball came out, it would pop out, and you would see a round white kind of ball in your hands, and it would be connected. There'd be a string attached to it, connecting it to a part of your brain, right? Anyway, so here's your eyeball. So your eyeball, okay, there's like this very thin layer called the cornea, and it's like transparent. And it has to be transparent because it has to allow the light through. It is surrounded by this layer, and this layer is like tough outer tissue, like this. It's like tough white tissue, and it's called the sclera. So you can actually poke your sclera. Don't do it! I wouldn't recommend it, but you can, if you take a finger and you poked it in your eye, you could poke it on your white part of your eye, your sclera, and you would feel that it was tough. So the sclera is white, and you can't see through the sclera. You can only see through the cornea, which is transparent. And it's actually part of the sclera, but it's a transparent part of the sclera. And so you need that to be transparent so you can see things. And the thing is you guys are able to detect only a certain region of light. Like, I don't know if you know, but when sunlight beams down on us, there's like a variety of wavelengths. There's like X-rays, which are like not very good for us, and they're high frequency, and our atmosphere deflects these X-rays. And then we also have UV rays that come in. So you have UV rays that come in, and then you have what we call visible light waves, and that's the visible light waves. That is what we see. So imagine all these visible light waves coming in from the sun. We can actually see the colors in those waves. And the colors on those waves is Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Okay? And so the sunlight carries visible light, Roy G. Biv, and we are able to see because of that. Okay, so there's the cornea. And the cornea, right? Right behind the cornea, and actually I drew this the wrong color. Oh no. Ugh, I hate when it does that. So let's just redraw this in. We're going to redraw the sclera and the cornea in. So here's the sclera. Okay, so here's the sclera right there. Here's the sclera right there. There's the cornea. And like right behind the cornea, this is your iris. And the iris is the colored part of the eye. Okay, now the hole in between, this part right here, that's the pupil. And the pupil is basically a hole that lets light in. Okay, and it's found, it looks black, but it's not actually. Like basically it's a window to the back of your eye, right? This light that's coming in from the sun. So if you look at the light coming in from the sun, that light coming from the sun is actually coming in through your pupil, okay? So that light is coming in from the pupil. And so the pupil is literally a hole. Like, don't try this at home, but if you took a small object, first of all, you would encounter your cornea, which would not allow that small object to get through. But if you could somehow poke past your cornea, you would now enter the pupil. And the diameter of the pupil is controlled by the iris. So the iris controls the diameter of the pupil. The iris is actually made up of muscle, right? And these muscles are adjusted. They're adjusted by this ciliary body. There's all these muscles called ciliary body. Oh, actually, we'll talk about this in a second. This is what happens when I don't teach for a while and then I get all messed up. Because the ciliary body actually controls the diameter of the lens. Right here. The muscles control the diameter of the iris controls the diameter of the pupil. And then right behind the iris, right here, is the lens. And the lens bends the light. So first the cornea, right here, bends the light first. So the cornea bends light first. And then the lens bends the light further. And this lens is attached to this, which is ciliary body, which is just a bunch of muscles that controls how wide or how narrow the lens gets. So it controls the width of the lens. That's what the ciliary body does, okay? Okay, so you have the outer layer of the eye called the sclera, which is the white part of the eye. You have the cornea, which is the transparent layer of the eye. You have the iris, which controls the diameter of the pupil. The pupil is basically a hole into your eyeball. The light passes through the pupil. It's now passing the lens. And the reason why the light is passing all these structures is eventually you want the light to hit a certain part of the back of your eyeball, which I talked about. But before we talk about that specific part, you got to know there's another layer at the middle layer of the eye. Right here, I put it in red. This is the choroid layer. And this choroid layer contains blood vessels, which is why it is red. And then there's this like inner region of the eye. So there's this innermost region of the eye like this. Okay, and this innermost region of the eye that I'm drawing right here in purple, that's called the retina. Okay, now it's the actual retina contains the photoreceptors. So the retina contains the photoreceptors that actually is able to detect that Roy G. Biv all those wavelengths of light that are entering the eye. And there's a specific part of the retina right here, we're going to draw right here, and that's called the fovea. And that's where you want to focus the light that's coming into your eye. You want to focus it on the fovea, which is part of your retina, which contains photoreceptors. And this is the optic nerve that I drew right here that leads to the back of the brain, the occipital lobe. So there you guys go. Those are the parts of the eye. Now, one thing that you have to know is that there's fluid in the eye. So there's all this fluid in the eye, and you need this fluid. Otherwise, you would inflate your eyeball like a balloon is inflated and deflated, right? So you need to inflate your eyeball to make it round, and this is called vitreous humor. And imagine if you were to drain this vitreous humor fluid. If you were to drain it, then your eyeball would sink. It would collapse in on itself. So you need this vitreous humor, which is fluid, to maintain the shape of your eye. And the reason why your cornea bulges out is because there's a structure called the aqueous humor that allows the cornea to bulge out. So there's fluid there and there's fluid there. Okay, so there you go. There's the structure of the eye. Now we're going to talk very quickly about how light travels. So light travels, okay? And remember in my last diagram, I told you guys like the light travels through the cornea first, right? And then it travels through the lens. And what you eventually want is the light to hit your fovea. And that's where you want it to, if the light doesn't hit the fovea like directly, then you're gonna need glasses. And I said to you guys just right now that this part of the eye here contains photoreceptors, and these photoreceptors are located in your retina. And so we're going to take a look at these photoreceptors. There's two types. There's your rods and cones. So your rods detect like grayish tones and like black and white, and it's also responsible for your peripheral vision. And cones are responsible for detecting color. And your fovea has the highest concentration of cones in the fovea. So you have this like really high concentration of cones. Okay, so one thing about rods. So if you were to take a look at your retina, you would see that your retina, kind of looks like this. It's made up of these like rods and these cones. Okay. So these rods, right, and these cones, so imagine this is imagine that this is like a cone, and this is a rod, this is another rod, and then there's another cone here, and then there's another cone here, right? So you can see that these cones that I drew here are located in the retina, right? And like these cones, and maybe I should have drawn the rods in like, here's the rod in black, here's another rod in black. So these cones and rods, this cone and this rod, these guys are the actual photoreceptors. So these guys are the ones that detect the light. And they detect specific wavelengths of light. So this one would detect like the indigo violet. This one would detect like the orange red, yellow. This one would detect the green, right? Sorry, green, yellow here. Like sort of like that, right? Like so what each one of these cones do is they detect certain wavelengths of light. So that means like when light hits the retina, right? The light that hits the retina actually activates, but you can't really see that. So the light activates the photoreceptor. And remember, the photoreceptor are the rods and the cones. So now they become activated, and now they conduct an action potential. So now there's an action potential or nerve impulse that's being conducted with all of this activity. Because the stimulus is light, they become depolarized. And then you detect these different wavelengths of light that are coming into your eye, the occipital lobe detects them. The back part of your brain detects all that different color of light, right? Now the rods are different because they detect, they're very sensitive, so they detect dim light. So when I say they're really sensitive, I mean like it takes like one single photon of light to activate a rod, whereas it takes like, to activate a cone, it takes like hundreds of photons of light to activate a cone. And so a photon of light is, I don't know if you know this, but a photon of light is found, like if here's the sun and the sun is like beaming down on us, light travels in waves. So light travels in waves. You can't see that way. So light travels in waves, and light also can travel as individual units called photons. So that's what's really kind of weird about light and sunlight. Like it's traveling towards us in like these energy waves, but within these energy waves are these like little tiny particles called photons. And these are like individual pockets of energy. And one of this pocket of energy, one of these photons is enough to activate one rod in your vision, right? But you need hundreds of photons of light to activate your cones. So these guys are really sensitive. So if you turn off the light and let's say there's only like a single photon of light, well, the rod will be activated. But like, let's say you're staring at the sun, there's just way too many photons of light bombarding your rods. They can't handle it. So they don't work in bright light. Only cones work in bright light. Okay, so rods generate an action potential with one photon of light. They're very sensitive. And cones generate an action potential when they're activated by hundreds of photons of light. And so basically that's all you got to know about the eye and the parts of the eye and how the eye works. Know all the structures of the eye and know how an action potential occurs in the eye, and that's how you see. I mean, there is a little bit on my, I talk sometimes a little about being farsighted or nearsighted, having glasses. And the reason why you have glasses is because you are not able to focus the light properly on your fovea. And if you're unable to focus your light properly on the fovea, which is where the highest concentration of cones are, then you are not going to see properly. Everything's going to look blurry. So that's why you wear contact lenses or glasses to correct that. Okay, so that's my lesson on